asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Fight math evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We 3D printing, set and ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another special episode of the Maple Pill. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever, and tonight is part 2 of a multi-part series where we're looking at the exact cost of COVID in regards to Canada, our deficit, and just, how much money have we actually frickin' spent on COVID-19 policies and measures around it. In part 1 of this video series, which if you guys haven't checked out, I'll encourage you to do so. We essentially just explored exactly where are we at from a federal deficit perspective. And spoiler alert, for the first time in Canada's history, we've hit over $1 trillion in deficit. That's a massive milestone and nothing to be proud of for us as Canadians. But in tonight's episode, we're going to be diving deeper into exactly how much money have we spent around COVID-19 and why has the government made it so difficult to understand exactly how much money we've spent around COVID-19? Because it actually is really hard. And the reason this series even started was in a previous episode of the Maple Pill, I was trying to figure out exactly how much has the war in Ukraine cost Canadians? How much have we financially committed as a country to Ukraine? And while in that case, it was hard for me to even figure it out, it appears that it's at least over $1 billion so far, what Canada's committed. And I imagine that that number will continue to balloon. When we're looking at COVID-19, the government's obfuscated things just as much in regards to making it difficult for Canadians to truly understand how much freaking money we've spent. So that's what we're going to be focused on in episode 2. In part 3 of this video series, I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 government questionable spending decisions around COVID-19. Now, there was a lot of different options available to me, and I wanted to keep the list to 10, so it doesn't even include things like ventilators. But I'd love to hear, what are your thoughts? What are your opinions when it comes to Canada's government spending in regards to COVID-19 and our reaction to the pandemic? Let me know in the comment section down below. As well, let me know what would be on your top 10 list of government, missteps or poor spending decisions during the pandemic. And there's a lot to choose from. So take your time. I'm sure I overlooked a few, but let's get into tonight's stories. So first, from the Globe and Mail, Liberals lose vote launching COVID-19 study after warning of risk to vaccine negotiations. So this came out October 26, 2020. And so understand right off the bat, we had the Liberals essentially threatening Canadians that, hey, if we actually have to tell you what's going on around our spending and you guys actually start studying it, we might not get vaccines. So you can either just trust us or you can risk everything. And that it doesn't seem like a great position to put Canadians in. And I definitely understand why they actually lost this motion back in 2020. So the Conservative motion passed 176 to 152 Monday afternoon with the support of the Bloc Québécois, NDP, and Green Party. So again, this is important to understand for a multitude of reasons. But the biggest one here is just that, again, right off the bat, the Canadian government didn't want to share with its citizens or its, opposition members of parliament exactly what was going on in regards to these negotiations, and really to allow us to have more transparency and understanding around Canada's spending. We didn't get off on a good foot in the first place, in my opinion. Next, we've got an article from CBC News. This is from December 7th, 2020. Trudeau government won't say who got billions of dollars in aid. While some payments have been revealed, the destinations of billions of dollars in aid remain secret. Again, understand, this is the CBC calling out the Justin Trudeau federal government. And so it's pretty rare for them to actually speak ill of their demigod. So while the government has made available high-level aggregate spending statistics or estimates of the net fiscal impact for the more than 100 programs it has launched since the pandemic began, only a few departments have released details about which individuals, groups, or companies have received government money. So again, it was like, pulling teeth to try and get information from the government. I understand 100 new programs, right, or spending initiatives in the government. A lot of these things will probably somehow evolve or mutate into permanent aspects of our budget. And that's why we need to really understand, where's this money going and is it justified? Because it's so rare for government to give back power once it's received it. It's so rare for government to dial back spending once they've spent it in a previous year, because that sets the new standard for government spending. And again, I'm very concerned about the entire trajectory of all this. I encourage you guys to dive deeper into it. But a lot of the arguments around why they redacted information, or it's commercially sensitive information, or it's part of the negotiations that we can't reveal, honestly, as a Canadian taxpayer, I don't give a shit. You're literally spending billions and billions of dollars, right? You've put us into over $1 trillion in debt. My personal share as a Canadian citizen is now $31,000. That's something we covered in part 1 of this video series. I don't care. You need to start telling us this information. We need more transparency. We live in the information age. There's no reason why we can't have far more transparency when it comes to government spending. And the fact that we haven't seen a dramatic improvement in this over the last couple of decades really tells us all we need to know, in my opinion, when it comes to how much does the government care about keeping us in the loop. And next, from Blacklock's reporter, 992,000 COVID files concealed. This is from May 25th, 2021. And the reason this is important is, again, what shenanigans are behind or in all these different files that are currently concealed. And when we look at some of the thousands of documents that have so far been revealed to Canadian taxpayers, there's a lot of things that seem questionable. So when going through the few thousands of pages of internal emails and briefing notes disclosed to date, again, this was as of May 25th, 2021, some of the things that stood out to Blacklock's reporters were a Liberal lobbyist contacted Cabinet seeking a contract for his son. A Liberal lobbyist won a $118 million contract for a client after boasting of getting things done. A former Liberal aide and ex-Liberal riding president lobbied for millions in contracts. A former Liberal MP's firm won a $237 million contract before his ventilators were approved. A Montreal contractor received a $282.5 million contract, though its devices twice failed testing. A failed Ottawa contractor received a $149 million contract after good meetings with aides. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made inaccurate claims of boasting of preparedness. Agencies were instructed to stress successful stories and conceal supply shortages. Cabinet considered invoking the Emergencies Act to seize pandemic-related factory production. Again, this is important, especially with hindsight now, right? We've seen the Emergencies Act actually enacted now once here in Canada, and that was to attack the Freedom Trucker Convoy protesters. But understand, the Cabinet actually considered essentially seizing factories here in Canada. That would be something that's unprecedented, at least in my lifetime. And Cabinet knowingly shipped date-expired medical supplies to provinces. So again, if this is just the tip of the iceberg, what else is below the surface that we haven't actually been able to, be deemed appropriate for our eyes? And how much of this is really like a security situation versus the government trying to hide themselves from embarrassment? I can't help but feel like it's the latter, right? This isn't like COVID is an enemy and we can't let COVID know our next move because COVID will be able to react accordingly to our moves here. This isn't a war with another intelligent being, right, or actor in the space. This is a virus. And so a lot of the information that they conceal from us for our own good, our own safety, comrade, I can't help but want to call bullshit on it. Next, jumping over to another article from the Globe and Mail, Canada releases redacted versions of COVID-19 vaccine contracts. And this is its own doozy because we're going to do a whole separate video on COVID-19 vaccines and Canada's contracts around it, because I understand we've committed to hundreds of millions of doses, it appears. It sounds like we've committed to giving out at least tens of millions of doses to other countries as well. And, we've also supported certain vaccine initiatives that it appears that those vaccines may not even get approved for various reasons. There is so much opportunity for government graft and grift around these contracts and all this crazy spending. Understand that we literally essentially doubled how much money the Canadian government spends in a year during COVID. So previously, I think if I remember my numbers correctly, in 2019, our total expenses were like $350 billion. In the first year of COVID, our government committed to spending $350 billion just around COVID-19 initiatives. How could you double a government spending in a single year and be effective or efficient in any serious sense of the word, right? You can't. There's just no way, especially when you've got a pandemic, when people are going to be calling in sick, when people are going to be getting sick, right? There's all sorts of opportunities here for bad actors to sweep in. And the only way we can really hold people accountable is through transparency, right? Is through making information more readily available than it would have been in other circumstances versus trying to obfuscate it further than normal. And again, we've literally seen the Canadian government go to extreme lengths to try and hide information from Canadian tax payers, particularly around COVID-19 spending. And when the Canadian government's been called out on the past, we literally saw this from our finance minister, where I believe it was Chrystia Freeland bragged about how generous our programs were. And, a sign of that was the fact that we spent more than we originally budgeted. That's not how that shit's supposed to work. And the government response shouldn't be generous. It should be methodical and thought through, right? We should actually know why we're giving out all these crazy sums of money, because as we talked about in the previous video, part 1 of this video series, there's going to be massive consequences down the road, whether it's us that have to pay it or future generations of Canadians. And I personally can't help but feel like we're on the precipice right now. $1.2 trillion in debt. I don't know if we can ever come back from that sort of deficit spending, but I know that if we continue down this path, if we spend, another $300 or $600 billion further getting ourselves into debt, if we go to $2 trillion, if we go past $2 trillion in deficit here in Canada, we won't be able to come back from that. We explored high level in part 1 of this video series, some of the options available, and none of them are tenable. But if we continue to just grow the state, right? If we just continue to grow the social safety net by adding dental plans, pharmacy plans, and all kinds of other spending boondoggles and opportunities for the NDP and Liberal coalition over the next handful of years, we're going to find ourselves in a situation that Canada will never be able to get out of, ever. Do you want that for future generations of Canadians? Do you want that for your children and grandchildren? To essentially just be slaves to the state because the state has spent so much money? I don't. I sure as hell don't. And that's why I think videos like this and trying to hold Canada's government accountable and try and rein in the spending is so important at this moment in time. Next from Blacklock's reporter, vote first, disclose costs later. So this is from December 17th, 2021. The latest pandemic relief bill will cost billions more than originally estimated, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland disclosed last night. The revelation came minutes after the Commons passed the bill and adjourned for Christmas. So, however, Freeland disclosed the cost of Bill C2, an act to provide further support in response to COVID-19, was much higher than earlier stated. Freeland said on November 24th, put the cost at $7.4 billion. Actual expenses were about 61% higher at a total of $11.9 billion, Freeland revealed. So again, understand that our federal government right now, the Liberal Party, they don't even want to tell other members of parliament, let alone the average Canadian citizen, how terrible their spending is, how just completely out of control it is. And it is completely out of control. It just like, we're selling our entire future. We're jeopardizing our entire country's future here on some of these crazy spending boondoggles. And that's why in part 3 of this video series, I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 questionable government decisions when it comes to spending around pandemic and the pandemic response. Next from Blacklock's reporter, hard to track Fed spending. This is from March 3rd, 2022. So federal budgeting leaves taxpayers with little ability to follow each and every dollar, budget officer Yves Gouraud said yesterday. Current practice sees cabinet propose billions in spending with little oversight, he said. There are mechanisms to prevent inappropriate expenditures. We're going to cover that in tomorrow's video, and I don't think that we're going to actually come to that conclusion. To prevent inappropriate expenditures, but there is no guarantee all these mechanisms are followed, Gouraud testified at the Senate National Finance Committee. Once the money is approved, it is much more difficult to follow each and every dollar. Now, why is that? Should it be that way? It should actually become easier once spending is approved for us to follow it rather than more difficult, right? Am I being unreasonable here? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments section. But that's what I've been afraid of, replied Senator David Richards from New Brunswick, who questioned budget practices. Cabinet on Monday tabled 2022-23 main estimates on federal spending that averages more than $420 billion a year. Again, our revenues aren't just magically increasing, right? Like our GDP is not going to just double next year, and we're going to be able to somehow, keep our spending under control while making a surplus of new revenue sources and being able to, catch up and pay down the deficit. It's just not going to happen. The only option I see available where we don't completely destroy the future of our country is through austerity today. Essentially, what the government is telling you is trust us and trust the officials, and we will use that money efficiently into the best purpose that we are saying we'll use it for, said Guru. That is the way the system is designed, he added. Well, if that's the way the system's designed, that we should just trust politicians in their crazy spending, the same way that we, should just trust Justin Trudeau when it comes to like SNC Lavalin or We Charity or pick any other scandal around Justin Trudeau, or again, other politicians and other previous administrations, my answer is no. Let's completely reinvent the system if that's how the system's designed. We should actually hold government accountable for its spending. We should be able to easily in a transparent manner get to the bottom of where every dollar goes. Again, we live in the technology age, right? Like we live in the 21st century. We've got computers, we've got databases. It's not like we need to go through, printed records to get to the bottom of this. We should be able to easily access this and make. So again, link to this Blacklock's Reporter article in the video description down below. But let's just kind of remind everyone how we started off initially. So this is April 1st, 2020. And again, this is no April Fools, but $350 billion for coronavirus relief. Trudeau Liberals grant themselves wartime spending power. So again, $350 billion would essentially be double what we normally spent in a given year. So in 2018 to 2019, the entire federal budget was $346.2 billion, up from $330 billion the year before. I'm just going to have a pregnant pause here to really let that sink in. In 2018 to 2019, the entire federal budget was $346 billion. The war on COVID, for the first year, they committed to spending $350 billion, which is more than $346 billion. And are we better off for it, right? Have we dramatically improved our healthcare system? Well, it doesn't seem that way, right? It seems like our healthcare system is just as fragile or more fragile, and we hear that every day in the mainstream media and from politicians, and that's their justification for continued mandates, lockdowns, masking policies, and all the other crazy shit we've seen them force upon us as everyday citizens of Canada. Again, this spending, a lot of it is somehow going to mutate, in my opinion, into permanent spending. And we're going to see new unprecedented deficits year after year. I don't see how Canada's going to get our way out of this. And even if we do, I imagine they're going to find new boondoggles like UBI and some of the other spending initiatives that have already been telegraphed by the NDP and Liberal coalition. From Blacklock's Reporter, again, from April 1st, 2020, $350 billion for COVID-19. And I actually appreciate them spelling it out here and just showing how many freaking zeros are involved in that. Because understand, going into 2018, 2019, we were at, what was it, like, I think 600 or $700 billion in total deficit. Now, we're actually over $1 trillion, right? We covered in yesterday's story where the Canadian Taxpayers Federation had to update their truck that keeps track of government deficit spending because it didn't go into the trillions. They should have never had to upgrade their truck because we should have never actually found ourselves in a position where we were spending $1 trillion. We just shouldn't be there as a country. And again, we are jeopardizing our entire future and the entire future of our country based upon all this crazy deficit spending that's been rolling out. Next, from CBC, Ottawa has spent $240 billion fighting COVID-19 in just 8 months. A CBC investigation follows the money. Analysis of 107 different measures and programs finds government short on details. This was from December 7th, 2020, and I think it was part of their Big Spend initiative. So if you guys want to see all of CBC's coverage around this, check out their Big Spend. But the federal government has spent an average of $952 million a day fighting the COVID-19 pandemic, according to CBC News analysis. Again, understand, it's not like we can go to one resource on the Canada or the gc.ca Government of Canada websites, it is so difficult to actually figure this shit out. I thought it was difficult trying to figure out how much money we spent or committed to Ukraine. It is so much harder here with what's going on with COVID-19 because we're talking about a magnitude of hundreds more when it comes to spending, right? Again, I've really struggled to actually get to the bottom of this. And I think, CBC probably did their best in estimating this. But as time went on, we've seen others do deeper dives into exactly how much Canadian government spent on COVID-19. And it's actually more. Again, this is just talking about the financial consequences of our government policies. We're not even talking about the mental health crisis, right? We're not talking about the impact on small businesses and, big businesses for that matter as well. But we've seen a disproportionate impact on small businesses. And we're not even talking about the opportunity cost, right? Or the fact that we essentially delayed, retarded the development of an entire generation of children for 2 years through crazy policies and reactions. I hope that years from now, we're going to look back and feel ashamed about the way we reacted to COVID-19. And not because we should have spent more, or we should have locked down harder, or we should have asked government daddy to govern us harder, but because we all should have looked upon ourselves as individually sovereign individuals and became more responsible for ourselves rather than more dependent upon the big state and the government spending. So again, I think CBC did a great breakdown initially here. There's a couple of good charts that are very helpful as well. So again, with this 240 billion, and this was just the first 8 months, we're looking at about 50 billion going to Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, 31 billion to CEBA, 9 billion to Youth Employment and Skills, 6 billion to PPE purchases, almost 6 billion to CMHC Insured Mortgage Purchase Program, 16 billion to other, right? And again, this is where it gets very difficult to figure it out. 81 billion to the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, 7 billion to EI enhancements, almost 6 billion to enhanced GST credits, and again, 10 billion to other, and 16 billion transfers to provinces. So if you want to dive deeper into this CBC article, I really encourage you to do it and look at their entire The Big Spend series. But now let's jump over to the Toronto Star and how much exactly has the pandemic cost Canada. Star analysis finds totals more than 1.5 billion a day. So again, this was May 29th, 2021. So it was about 5 months after the CBC did their initial deep dive. But again, understand as more details come out, we see this number ballooning, right? This is literally more than 50% higher than what the CBC estimated it at. And this is a year into the pandemic now. So to find the total cost, the Star combed through the budget, Stats Canada reports, and annual fiscal updates. The result, Canada spent more than twice as much on the pandemic as it spent on the Second World War. And yeah, that number is adjusted for inflation. So a price tag higher than the Second World War. And again, the Star here has a breakdown just of some of the different spending initiatives and where that money's gone. But it's so difficult to really put this into perspective when we're dealing with so many zeros, right? I think all of us can nod along and in theory understand $1 trillion, but to really understand all the money, all the people that have now become more and more dependent upon the state, and how much more difficult it's going to get them into a position where they're not dependent upon the state. I don't see how our government shrinks after this, right? The same way that we saw the bureaucracy and administration grow dramatically during the World War I and World War II era in most Western countries, particularly in Canada and the United States. The same thing, unfortunately, I think we're going to find play out here in the COVID-19 era. So just looking at a few points, though, from the Toronto Star article, despite stimulus packages from the government, despite the recovery of the global economy, our economy will continue to suffer as sectors remain shut down and the unemployment rate remains above pre-pandemic levels, he said. In that sense, our recovery is far from complete. Long-term costs could be trillions. Again, I think that they're right here. It certainly appears that at a minimum, it's going to end up being $1 trillion. And again, that's before we look at some of the, less straightforward spending initiatives, right? Again, there's certain things that I'm sure right now are being classified as loans or refundable amounts that will eventually be, morph into grants or free money that was given away rather than a loan. So again, it's so difficult to even at any point in time be accurate with what the government spending is. Again, shouldn't that be one of the things that the government's responsible for, is truly keeping us in the loop on how much they're spending? The cost of the pandemic will linger well after the virus is contained, experts say. Further on, in the United States, a pair of Harvard economists recently estimated that the pandemic will cost the nation at least $16 trillion, a conservative estimate, they say, if it ends by next fall. And so again, this was all as of May 2021. So now we're already approaching May 2022, and things are only continuing to grow greater, right? Canada spent $624 billion on COVID-19 pandemic report. This is from True North as of June 1st, 2021. So again, estimates show that between March 2020 and April 2021, Canada spent $624.2 billion on pandemic initiatives, or $1.5 billion a day for the entire year. And this is still just talking about what went down in 2021. We still need to add on what's gone over the last year now. The study also found that in 2020, Canada's economy took a 8.3% hit to its GDP, totaling $2.31 trillion as of 2019. So yeah, again, link to this True North article in the video description down below. And then finally, want to end here with Financial Post. This is from February 18th, 2022. Opinion: spending to the max on COVID-19 programs didn't really help. 2 years into the pandemic, it is clear that more government spending does not guarantee better results. This is an important article. I'd really encourage you guys to read it cover to cover, but I just want to highlight a few key points here. Romer's data, which includes expenditures implemented or announced up to July 2020, shows that the biggest spending governments during the early days of the pandemic were the United States and New Zealand, each at 11.5% of GDP, followed closely by Canada at 10.1%. 4 of the top 5 biggest spenders were wealthy English-speaking countries. Canada spending was more than double that of other advanced countries such as France, Spain, and Italy. Further on in the article, the only significant factor, according to Romer, was the creditworthiness of each country. Countries in 2020 appear to have been constrained in their fiscal choices by their ability to borrow, emphasis added. In other words, government spent as much as they could. Yeah. So again, Canada literally looked, like a lot of countries, unfortunately, looked at how much money can I spend? That's how much money we'll spend. It doesn't appear that this was well thought out, that this was, a meticulous decision made, right? This was literally, how much will you guys allow us to spend? Then we'll spend all that, and we'll probably end up spending more than that. But, we'll disclose that after the fact and later down the road once it's too late, right? Once the horse is out of the barn, there's no sense really closing the gate. OECD countries with poor bond rating scores, such as Italy and Greece, spent substantially less than countries with higher credit ratings. Canada, which began the pandemic with a top-ranked AAA credit rating, was one of those countries that could and did borrow vast amounts. Our credit rating has since dropped as the result of the spending spree. So again, there's consequences here that are going to impact Canadians, in my opinion, for generations. Romer suggests these big spending countries were driven by the unique terror engendered by the pandemic. But if rich, terror-stricken countries simply spend as much as possible when COVID hit, does this mean spending to the max was the best strategy? More recent data suggests not. And again, diminishing returns, right? This isn't a complicated or complex economic concept here. This idea of diminishing returns, that like, if I'm starving, that first 1,000 calories, those are important, right? The next 1,000 calories, important, but less important than the first 1,000. The next 1,000, the 1,000 after that become less and less important to me, right? Again, it doesn't matter what aspect we look at it. When it comes to government intervention, we usually see a dramatic reduction in effectiveness the more of it we have, right? So those diminishing returns play out dramatically when it comes to government spending. According to the IMF, Canada is the 5th largest spender, with pandemic spending totaling 15.9% of GDP. The top spot is once again held by the US at a stunning 25.4%. And again, 4 of the top 5 spots are occupied by wealthy English-speaking countries. At the bottom is Mexico, with a paltry 0.7% of GDP spent on COVID-19 programs. And what's important here is when you actually look into what the death rates are between some of these different countries, it's not dramatic. And so well, I know that like bleeding hearts or individuals that don't want to look at reality will say like, you can't put a price on the cost of a life, right? And while that's a noble sentiment, maybe understand that no, you can, right? Like if we're literally talking about mortgaging or sacrificing our entire future to, take a death rate from whatever 11.9 to 11.7, that's a real consideration that we all need to, understandably look at. And now again, I understand no one had a crystal ball day one when this played out, but I suspect that had we actually even looked towards how other countries were reacting and what their real-time results were, we probably would have came to a similar conclusion that we didn't need all the government spending and boondoggles that played out over the last 2 years. Again, in part 3 of this video series, I'm going to be sharing with you my top 10 government spending boondoggles, and there's some pretty big doozies in there. We're talking about millions of dollars that are just purely wasted, right? We're also talking about smaller contracts that were, again, appear to just be the government buying good press. This, I don't know. Is this the country you guys want to live in? Because right now, this is the trajectory our country is headed on. Canada's 81 COVID-19 deaths per 100,000 is slightly better than average, but our spending is extremely high. The efficiency leader among democratic nations is South Korea with a mortality rate of 11 per 100,000, a fraction of what Canada experienced in COVID-19 expenditures of just 6.4% of its GDP. Caution is obviously necessary when linking government spending with COVID-19 deaths, since public health policies, culture, and geography also play major roles in mortality rates. That said, increased spending does not appear to guarantee better health results. Again, there's a multitude of factors here. It's almost impossible to ever really get to an apples-to-apples comparison when we're even looking at things like COVID-19 deaths, because understand, one of the biggest questions here is, deaths from COVID-19 and deaths with COVID-19 and how each individual country or state decided to report those factors, right? Again, I personally don't think that we've got accurate enough data and a true enough understanding to be able to make those apple-to-apple comparisons, but it is worth noting from this Financial Post article that there's no obvious relationship between spending and results when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, I imagine that there's that little bit of results, right? The first little bit probably got massive returns for us, but each incremental additional expense has diminishing returns, right? And what we saw was just governments that could spend more chose to spend more. Here's the key takeaway for Canadian taxpayers. Our government racked up huge debts during the pandemic, but we still didn't get the best health or economic results. Disappointing results among big spending countries are mainly driven by the fact much of that spending was motivated by panic rather than rational or efficient policy making. Romer points to numerous examples of ineffective and wasteful COVID-19 fiscal policies in the US. And tomorrow we'll be covering them for Canada. And this is the biggest issue. Our infrastructure has not improved dramatically over 2 years ago. And yet we spent all this crazy amounts of money, right? These sums of money that we can never get back. I'm sure that there's lots of, pundits, lobbyists, individual business owners that made out like bandits because they knew how to manipulate the system, or politicians at the time. But we, as an average Canadian, we are not better off because of all this crazy spending our government implemented. I don't think that we're going to find out that we're better off for all the crazy promises we made to vaccine corporations as well, and all the crazy commitments we made. We're already seeing Canada donate or give away tens of millions of COVID shots, or committing to it. And again, when I try and really figure this shit out, there doesn't seem to be a comprehensive resource here. Again, I appreciate mainstream media for the bit of coverage they give on this subject matter, because again, without them, this would have been a hell of a lot harder for me to put together this video series. But other than the government not wanting us to understand how the sausage is made, I truly do not understand why it's not easier for them to be transparent and show us exactly where and how they're spending the money. Again, links to this story and all stories in the video description down below. But as a result of COVID-19 largesse, Canada's federal debt to GDP ratio is set to grow by nearly 2/3 from its pre-pandemic level. The inevitable result will be to severely constrain future generations' ability to meet future needs. For Canadian taxpayers, the impact of the fiscal response to the pandemic is likely to last longer, maybe much longer, than the disease itself. It's now time for the federal government to end its pandemic subsidies. Again, Ending the pandemic subsidies is just part one of a multifaceted approach the government needs to take at this point in time if we ever want to rein in government spending, if we ever want to see a balanced budget again, if we ever want to protect the future of Canada for future generations of Canadians. Because right now, we're just like, all this government spending has literally just been a triage initiative. We haven't fixed any of the underlying structural issues in our healthcare system, any of the other underlying issues in our general economy. And yet, we've spent unprecedented levels of Canadian taxpayer dollars. This should be really concerning. We are literally mortgaging our entire future for today, and we're not even getting great results for it, right? Maybe there could be an argument made if we were best in class, right? But we're not. And again, it's difficult to even understand who is best in class. But when we look towards countries like even Mexico that spent such a fraction of its GDP, or countries like Sweden that didn't initiate the same sort of restrictive mandates and lockdown policies and all that, it's hard for me to look at where Canada is today and not want to be an armchair quarterback and judge the decisions the government has made over the last 2 years. And it seems like at this point in time, the government's answer to everything is just spend more money. And hey, maybe that buys you some votes in the short term, but you are literally costing Canada's entire future. So anyways, that's my hot take on this. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions. If you think I got something wrong, let me know in the comment section down below. If you like what I'm doing with the Maple Pill, please smash that like button, hit subscribe. I'd love to get to 1,000 subscribers before my YouTube channel is inevitably deleted and thrown down the memory hole by Big Brother. Again, it would just be a little moral victory for me, right? Or just an ego win, I guess you could call it. If you guys want more Matt McKeever in your life, you can follow me on Instagram, Matt McKeever Unfiltered. I mainly just share, shit posting memes and my frustration and, anger at the government and some of my crazy anarchist views on Instagram. So that's probably the best way to follow along real time my thoughts and opinions. A reminder, every single weekday night, I do an episode of the Maple Pill here, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you guys hate watching this on big tech, I don't blame you. You can go and watch my videos on Rumble or BitChute as well. And maybe I'll roll out to a few more platforms in future future episodes of the Maple Pill. Let me know if you think I should be on, Gab or Truth or what are some of the other ones. Anyways, let me know what platform should I be uploading the Maple Pill to. I appreciate you guys. And again, reminder, this isn't going to get better unless we as Canadians demand it gets better. Until we start actually holding accountable our politicians, we're going to see no improvements here. So it's up to us to change the trajectory of our country, to change the future, to make sure that we don't jeopardize everything that we have today as Canadians that we enjoy and appreciate about our country. Because I really am concerned for our future, and I think you guys should be too. Thanks, guys. I'll see you tomorrow.
Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Web fire, math table, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with